Hello, boys and girls of Credit Union Land, and welcome to episode 56 of the CUInsight Experience. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Co-op Financial Services. Co-op is your trusted payments processing partner whose mission it is to drive the credit union movement forward. We couldn't be happier to have Co-op on as a sponsor of the podcast. My name is Randy Smith. I'm one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and it is my job on the show to have conversations with the best and the brightest of the credit union community. I get to pick their brains and see if we can't find a few nuggets that we can all learn from. My guest on today's show is Rachel Pross. Rachel is the Chief Risk Officer at MAPS Credit Union. Rachel wrote a post on LinkedIn last year about how her life has changed since she found out just a little over a year ago that she had MS. The post really hit me, and I reached out to her to get her on the show. I thought it was an important topic to talk about disabilities in the workplace. This is a huge issue, quite honestly, facing the workforce overall. It's growing even more with an aging population. We talked about life and career and some of the leadership lessons and life hacks that Rachel has learned along the way. She also gave us a quick update on pot banking, which she has been front and center on nationally. I found Rachel's post on LinkedIn to be just so brave for her to put it out there, and her willingness to share that with us today was not lost on me. It's an inspiring story filled with life lessons throughout. I think the way Rachel and her team at MAPS have responded can teach us all, leadership lessons that transfer well beyond the walls of our credit unions. So, without further ado, I give you my conversation with Rachel Pross. Enjoy. Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I was looking forward to having you on. I've obviously been following you for a while now through the social medias and everything. And then you wrote a LinkedIn post the end of last year, and I just felt like it was a conversation to have. I guess as you described it, it was a post that you wrote on LinkedIn that was rather personal, not one that you ever thought you would share or have to share, I guess, and I have to imagine it was difficult to put yourself out there in that way, as it is for any of us, I think, sometimes when we let people in. For those who haven't read the post, and we will link to it because I think everybody should read it in the show notes, but could you tell our listeners, how did your life change at 39, a little over a year ago now? And, like I said, we'll link to the post so everybody can read it.
Sure. So about a year ago, a little over a year ago now, after months of some really baffling symptoms and sometimes kind of crippling pain, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, or MS. And it's been a journey since then, for sure.
So, I mean, it's such an interesting thing. I know on the first episode of season 2, like Chairman Hood talked about, like when he was talking about diversity and equity and inclusion, he also talked about disabilities and that idea of bringing your whole self to work. And it was interesting because I had read an article at the end of last year that was talking about the challenges facing the hospitality industry, because so much of the population has some sort of a disability or another. For you, and I thought, I guess, a lot about your post after, like I said, that I read it. How has it changed the outlook on your career? Really just,
right.
How has life changed, I guess?
It's really weird. It's strange because you get this news that feels so just paralyzing, and then life moves on, and I'm still going to work every day, and I'm still playing violin in the symphony and racking up my airline miles with kind of a crazy travel schedule. But I decided to just be open about the diagnosis from the beginning. I kind of looked at it as it is what it is, and it's part of who I am now. And being stoic and pretending that everything's okay and that I feel great is not going to do me any good. And I figure, why not just be authentic? And like you said, bring my whole self to work. And my whole self includes MS right now. And for the rest of my life, unless they come up with an amazing cure somehow. What's been surprising to me, really, since I wrote that article is just the number of people who have reached out to me privately to say how MS has affected them personally or how it's affected their loved ones or family members. And so it's been encouraging to know that I'm not alone. And you hear that phrase now and then, and you see it on t-shirts that everybody's fighting a battle. And this has been eye-opening. It's so true, because if you talk to me today and you didn't know that I was dealing with this, I don't think you would know. But I've learned through this that people I had no idea were facing their own personal health struggles. They're out there and I'm not alone. And I'm actually very fortunate to have gotten a diagnosis when I did. And at least now I know what I'm dealing with and how to fight it.
I was going to ask, I mean, from a career standpoint, you mentioned putting it out there. Was that something you did like, at MAPS to the people you work with? Again, I know you through the national travel and speaking that you've done. So is that something that you have to think about, before accepting, say, a speaking engagement or going to a conference or?
Yeah, I've definitely become a little more judicious about my travel schedule since my diagnosis. And when it came to talking about it at MAPS, it was kind of hilarious how it all came out because I knew I was facing something and I knew that there was something really wrong, but I wasn't sure what it was. And I had gone to a rheumatologist first thinking it was pain related. And he kind of just dismissed me and told me that I was the picture of health and that if I was hiking hundreds of miles a year, then there was nothing wrong with me. And so that was kind of a setback. And I thought, well, maybe I'm crazy. Maybe this is in my head. But then I really, in summer of 2018, I knew something was dreadfully wrong. And I finally had to just sit down with my boss. And I had made this decision to tell him, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I know something's happening to my health. And I need answers. And this might mean that I have to leave work and go to appointments and do what I need to do. And I'm pretty blunt most of the time. I don't mean to be that way. It's just kind of the way I'm wired. And so I had rehearsed this very delicate way of bringing it up in a conversation with him. And it didn't happen that way at all. We were having our regular check-in meeting and I just suddenly blurted out, there's something wrong with me. Or I don't remember the exact way I worded it, but it came out of left field. And thankfully he was very gracious about it and has been supportive all along the way. And once I got the diagnosis, I let my peers know. I haven't made like an all staff announcement or anything, but it's nothing I'm hiding. And I am having to be better to myself and just understand that I'm not superhuman and my health needs to come first. And that might mean that I do less speaking and that's okay.
Absolutely. The question that just popped into my head, could you give any recommendations? It sounds like the conversations that you've had at MAPS have gone fairly well, right? Like put yourself on the other side of the table. If somebody who works for one of us comes to us, is there any tips that you have for say a leader in that position? The word empathy just keeps coming to mind, but
yeah. I actually think this was an amazing response by my boss, Mark, is when I kind of blurted out all of this dramatic stuff and just kind of said, so there you have it, something's wrong and I need to go take care of myself somehow. And his response was, how can I support you through this? It wasn't, this is what you should do, or this is my advice, or this is what I'd like you to do with your work schedule. It was, you do what you need to do, and I'm here to support you, and you tell me how I can do that, and how can I better support you? And that just blew my mind. I will never forget it. It was an amazing feeling walking out of the room, just knowing he had my back and that I could face this, knowing that I had my employer's support.
Yeah, that sounds like exactly what you wanted and probably needed to hear.
Right.
There's a question that, for the past year I've asked towards the end of the podcast, but I'd actually like to ask it to you up front. And that's, did it make you take a different look at life have things become more important? And my favorite part of this question generally when I ask it is, what have you realized is maybe less important?
Right. Okay, so if I wrote this down, I think it would be War and Peace to answer this. And I certainly don't have all the answers. In short, yes, it's been life altering. So obviously the negative side is the disease itself and just the unknowns of how it's going to impact my life long term. And ironically, when I wrote that article on LinkedIn, I had been doing really well on my disease modifying therapy. It was these injections that I was doing 3 times a week. And I even talked about that in my conclusion of that article. And then on December 13th, I had a relapse really suddenly. And I got really sick, ended up in the hospital that night, and an MRI showed that I have new MS lesions in my spine, which was devastating news, just a sucker punch to the gut, because I thought, okay, I'm doing everything they're telling me to do. I've radically altered my diet, and I'm doing these painful injections, and I'm following everything that the doctor tells me to do, and it's not enough. And it was such a sucker punch. But then I thought, first off, I'm fortunate that these lesions were discovered now, so we can move on to plan B. Had I not gone into the hospital and had that scan, we would have assumed that my disease modifying therapy was still working when it wasn't. So I'm grateful that they were discovered, and now we can move on to plan B, which is going to be some pretty powerful immunotherapy treatments that'll be done in the hospital, but are really promising. But it just really solidified what I've learned on this whole journey, which is that none of us are guaranteed the life that we plan for ourselves. And when you're diagnosed with a progressive neurological disease or any other life-altering diagnosis, it gives you this forced, really powerful perspective. And you suddenly have to realize, you know what, my whole career, it's just been this what's next, and moving to the next title or moving to the next step in my growth as a professional, and or the next achievement. And really, when you're not sure if you're going to be walking a few years from now, you think, what is that even? What am I focused on? And really, my value as a person cannot be tied to my career. And I also learned that just the authenticity that I thought I had was pretty surface level if I wasn't willing to be honest with myself and be vulnerable about something like this. And I had to acknowledge the fact that work would go on without me if I have to walk away. I don't want to walk away. I'd love to finish my career at the pinnacle of every effort I've ever put into it. But work will go on if I have to go a different direction. And really, that was kind of liberating. And I think the last thing that hit me really hard with it is that we can't afford to wait around for opportunities or these special moments to land in our laps. And you need to be just as diligent about scheduling your PTO with your family as you are about meeting the demands of your career. More diligent, because in the end, I mean, do you really think 10 years from now, are you going to remember that your board packet in August of 2019 was flawless? Or are you going to remember that you missed your son's band concert for it? Because I guarantee you, your son will remember that. So it was just major, major perspective shift.
So that's interesting. That's something Jill and I have talked a ton about, is the idea of balance and work-life integration and things of that nature, and trying to, be intentional in designing the lives that we do. Have you made any, obviously for your health, you've made changes, and you just mentioned kind of taking a look at what you'll remember down the road. It might be that band, concert over the board packet. Have you found the secret hack, I guess? How about that for a balanced life? Can you share that one?
I wish I knew the secret hack to a balanced life. I think that one thing that really has changed, that I have changed in the last year, is that when I'm sitting in a meeting or being faced with a challenge or being faced with some type of a scheduling mishap, and I can feel myself getting worked up and stressed out or irritated, I think, am I actually going to remember this day a year from now? Or am I going to remember this decision a year from now? Is this life altering? And if it's not, I need to just take a deep breath and let it go. It's not the end of the world. And that is so, it's not that I don't care, but it's just so liberating to think that I have this benefit of perspective now that I never had before. And I'm really making a concentrated effort to reduce my stress level, and also know when to say no. It's kind of liberating. If I don't want to do something, I just say no, and it just feels great. So I'd highly recommend that.
That is something I've practiced quite a bit over the past 5 or 6 years. Is that one of my favorite answers to anything is just no, I don't want to. So
it feels so great.
If it's not hell yes, it's no, right? So
right, exactly. And you don't have to say I'm sorry, no. you can just say, no, I don't want to do that.
I love that. I think it's fantastic advice. I'd like to, move on to the second part of the show, because I know you have there's a ton of the leadership side as well on this podcast. And, we can circle back to all of this in the end as well. But one thing I know I'd probably get a little bit of flack if I didn't ask you about, but I'll link to all the other podcasts and articles that are out there that you've talked on this. But you really have, over the past couple of years, been front and center on pot banking. You've testified in front of Congress a couple of times even. So anything new at this moment? Anything that people should know about? Or it seems like it does seem like a huge topic of conversation that keeps changing by the day.
It does. Well, impeachment has kind of derailed a lot of the goings-on in D.C.
Yeah.
Senator Crapo, who is chair of the Senate Banking Committee, he has issued some comments recently that don't seem too encouraging. But the way I look at it, the good news is that even if safe banking doesn't pass, the conversations are happening, and those hearings, whether they end up being fruitful in legislation or not, they were an opportunity to educate and reveal some of these complex economical issues that are sometimes just lost in the drama around cannabis itself. So I'm still hopeful. I'm still optimistic, and we'll see what happens.
Like I said, I'll link to everything because there has been a lot written, and you've been a major part of that conversation. So, well, the last question on this section, if we're sitting down and it's a year from now, and this might go against, kind of living in the moment more, but, what are you most proud of that you've accomplished if you break out that crystal ball?
Man, these are hard questions. So a year from now, okay, this is going to sound so cheesy, but I'd like to say that a year from now, my MS is back in remission. And I'd like to say that my employees here at MAPS are proud of their accomplishments, because I really feel like the biggest part of my job is helping them accomplish what they need to accomplish. And then I'd like to say that I have successfully circumnavigated Mount Hood, because I am going to tackle the Timberline Trail this year. So that's it.
That sounds like a fantastic goal. Do you know Monica Bells?
I don't. I know the name.
She is a CEO of a credit union on Kauai, and she has a big birthday coming up, and she's a rock climber. So she has one also that I think on her episode of the podcast, she put it out there so people would hold her accountable to it or something like that. But
nice.
Anyways, you guys should meet.
Very good.
Like I said, moving on, I think that's a perfect transition. Those seem like amazing things. I hope every one of those comes true.
Thanks.
To move on to the leadership and the life hacks portion, what inspired you originally to take the gig as chief risk officer at MAPS back in 2016? You've had quite the career in credit unions.
Thanks. Well, this one's actually an easy question, because long before I ever came to MAPS, I knew that MAPS was this bold and progressive credit union where people weren't afraid to take risks and go out on a limb and do kind of just cool, exciting things that you don't always hear about. So I had always found myself hanging out with the MAPS guys at conferences. They're just fun. I loved the culture and just kind of this fun-loving spirit where they do this amazing work, but don't take themselves so seriously that they're not having fun at work every single day. Mark, my boss, will tell you that I turned him down the first time he offered me the job here, and I get nonstop grief for it. So believe me, they will never let me live that down. But a year later, we started talking about MAPS again, and I just knew it was this opportunity to take really smart risks that would do good, and I jumped at it. And I will always say that it was the best move I ever made. I absolutely love my job here.
Oh, that's beautiful. So you were watching it from the outside. How has the inspiration changed now that you've had time on the job?
I can honestly say I'm still inspired in my work every single day. Our exec team, I just feel like we're this rock solid group, and we have a blast together. We're all really opinionated, and we bring different perspectives and different strengths to the table, but sometimes it's just magical. And I love that we can have good, heated discussion behind closed doors, and we still come out united and razzing each other at every opportunity. So I'm lucky. I really love my job.
That's fantastic. Brought up another question for me. Is there something that you, like as an executive team at MAPS, that you do to kind of create that safe space where you can come in and disagree, but then walk out and just kind of everyone's good still? Or
I wish I knew if there was a magic formula for that. I think that actually I'm not sucking up, I swear, but I do have to give kudos to my boss, because I think Mark cultivates that by the way he recruits, and he looks for those different strengths and skill sets. And I just think that we found our stride. And I just feel like right now the dynamics of the group were so different, but we just really do a good job together. So I can't take any credit for it. We're also, as an organization, just interestingly, we've adopted this Arbinger leadership practices. There's a book out there, and they're going to kill me for not being able to remember it, but it's a kind of a course of study on collaboration and just office dynamics and how we interact with one another. And as an organization, we've adopted this methodology, and the entire exec team went through it. Then our leadership team, now every new employee in the credit union goes through this course. And I really do think it has made a difference for us organizationally to better communicate and better collaborate.
You'll have to send me over the link to the book. I'm sure everybody's
I'll do that.
Going to be interested to hear which one it is and maybe order it.
Yeah.
How do you describe your leadership style?
I am very much a leader who, this is going to also sound kind of cliche, but I believe in hiring good people and getting out of their way. So I see my job, I'm there to guide, support, clear obstacles. I would say I'm the opposite of a micromanager. I really want my team to have autonomy, and I purposely hire for people who fill in my blind spots, who can shore up my weaknesses. So the last thing I want to do is start telling them how to do their jobs.
I'm adding this in here. Is that something you've developed more over time? Or because I know often as young leaders, we tend to want to be the smartest person in the room. So,
yeah.
And then with maturity, we start to go, no, it's great to have other smart people around. So has it always been that way?
I definitely think it's something I've developed over time. I still learn something new all the time. I don't have all the answers, but it's over time. I have come to the realization that I don't have it all figured out, and we can't do it alone. I'm super introverted, believe it or not. I actually am.
Me too.
Yeah, see, that's surprising, but fiercely, independent, almost to a fault. I've had to come to the realization over the years that we just can't do it alone. And so that has developed over time, and probably many hard lessons.
I concur. No, it surprises everybody when I say I'm introverted, and I completely get what you're saying. I tend to be a person, and it worked well to create CUInsight, but not necessarily manage. Is putting my head down and just doing it myself. But that's why we have a great team now. Just took me a little longer to learn. Is there something that your team has heard you say so many times that they can finish your sentence?
Okay. Well, my kids would definitely say it's buck up, because I say that all the time. And it's funny when they fill out these sentimental Christmas cards and different things like that, they frequently say insert buck up somewhere in their messaging to me. So I say that a lot. And I think I probably say it at work too. But I think if my employees had to say what I say the most often, it would probably be when I ask them. I frequently ask the question of, if this was 100% your call, what would you do and why? Because one of my biggest kind of pet peeves in the workplace, going back forever, is when people bring a problem to a room and just dump it in the center of the table, because I don't want to hear about their problems. I want to hear about what the challenge is and what they're going to do to overcome it. And I can help steer, and I can have their back, and I can help them vet ideas, but don't come into the room and dump a problem on my desk. Come in and bring a solution to the table based on your expertise, and then we can go from there. But I think it would probably be that question. What would you do and why if this was your call?
You're not the first person to mention that idea. And I remember hearing that at a conference a few years back, where somebody said, like, that great question is, what would you do, before you start to put your opinion out there? But that idea of, and it's something we've actually talked since Lauren came on board at CUInsight, she's talked a lot about is, okay, if there's a problem, at least come with one solution to it, right? Like to start, like, it doesn't mean that's going to be the solution, but you should have something there. So
yeah, give me some options.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Sometimes this was a question I added for the second season is, again, just like year one, so many of these are kind of scratch my own itch questions. So I figure I'll ask a bunch of smart people. As a leader, you often have to make difficult decisions that sometimes people don't like them on the short term. How have you been able to cultivate, I guess, in yourself, the ability to make those tough decisions? And my guess is that has to happen quite a bit being the chief risk officer at a very progressive credit union.
Yeah, that is true. Well, there's probably another quote that I could have said a little bit earlier, which is, I always say I'm not risk averse, I'm risk aware. So I love taking smart risks, and I love seeing those pay off. I think I probably find myself saying no if something is the enemy of simplicity. I don't know why, and I see it. We often see kind of complex things in risk just because of the nature of the area. There's compliance and all of these different complexities. But I feel like I'm not like cutting credit unions down, but it feels like clunky and kind of cumbersome processes are this genetic trait of credit unions. And we've got to grow out of that. So if I start hearing an idea that involves a million variables and complexities, my gut response is usually going to be, no, that does not sound awesome. As for making those tough calls, I don't know, maybe it's my German heritage, but I'm pretty stoic when it comes to stuff like that. I'm okay if somebody doesn't like me or disagrees with me, and I just shake it off and move on. It's ultimately, I think as a leader, you have to be able to make those tough decisions and not constantly be looking in the rearview mirror after you make those decisions. You have to make the best decision you can with the knowledge you have at the time and move on. Great, learn from your mistakes, that's fine. But if you're continually looking in the rearview mirror and kicking yourself for decisions that you made along the way that perhaps weren't the right decision, you're not going to benefit anybody, and you're certainly not going to benefit yourself. So shake it off and move on, and just be better for it.
Buck up.
Yep, buck up.
It's funny. Something you mentioned earlier in your answer there was like about the process, and just it becoming too complicated with the pace of change in financial services. It seems like we, as credit unions, all need to make those, make things simpler. How about that? To say what you said. Is there a common leadership myth that you would like to debunk?
I would say the myth of, and it's funny because I think I've said it a couple times while we've been talking just this morning, but I think the myth of the magical formula, and I don't mean to sound arrogant at all. I'm not sitting here with like a cigar in a velvet chair thinking I'm super successful.
That would be fantastic, though.
It would be awesome. In like a Cocker Spaniel or something, very classy. But I'm often asked, what the secret to success is or whatever. And I always think it's funny because I don't see myself in that velvet chair yet. Someday. But I'm always thinking like there's no secret. There's no special book or magical formula or wizardry or some inspirational words I have hanging over me. The only quote I have in my office right now is one from Step Brothers. But
which quote? Come on.
It's the one when he's singing. Actually, it was another credit union person sent me this coffee mug, and it's when Brennan is singing and he's told that he sounds like a combination of Fergie and Jesus. It's just the funniest quote. I love it.
The voice of our generation, right?
Yes, it makes me laugh every time I look at it.
Step Brothers was one of my, like, that movie on my iPad, like running around credit unions. Yes. If I only had a half hour to watch something before I land or something like that, I go back to Step Brothers.
It is. We were just talking about that. I was at a conference recently and saying just every time I travel, it seems to be playing on some channel in the hotel room, and I can watch it 100 times and laugh every single time. It's just so stupid and hilarious. But anyway, I would say that there's no magical formula. That's the myth. I think it's just about hard work, and I sound like my grandpa, but it really is about just hard work and surrounding yourself with a team that complements your strengths and shores up your weaknesses. And that's it.
When you think back to earlier in your career, is there a mistake that you made? And we kind of touched on this earlier a little bit, but or that you see young leaders make?
I can say, a mistake I made was kind of what we were talking about, of just thinking I had it all figured out by myself, and that really I could just do it all alone. In college, I hated group projects. I just thought it was ridiculous that I had to, actually, I still hate group projects, but I just thought it was ridiculous that I had to waste my time bringing other people on board with writing an academic essay or something. But in reality, nobody does it alone, and we need to just surround ourselves with good people and build each other up.
Has there been a piece of advice or a life lesson that you've just find yourself going back to over and over throughout your career?
Well, I guess the biggest inspiration for me for a really long time has been my boss. When I first moved to Eugene, the woman who hired me, her name was Kim Woodward. And she was an executive team member at Northwest Community Credit Union down in Eugene. And she was diagnosed with ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease, about a year after she hired me. And she still finished CUI's executive management school that year. And this was to a place where she was unable to walk and was progressively weaker. And she was just unfailingly brave and witty to the very end. I went to visit her in Washington once, and we were sitting in her garage, and I was driving, and she had gotten her wheelchair into this van. And I had turned the car on, and her ramp was taking longer than I expected to withdraw back into the van. And so we were sitting at her garage with like carbon monoxide, and she looked at me and she goes, "Okay, I'm dying, but you don't need to speed it up." And I was just like, oh my gosh. She was hilarious, even while dying. Yeah. And her just persistence and determination and courage was unbelievable. She's definitely the most inspirational person I've ever known. And she would often say, just be your wonderful, genuine self. And she'd say, you're going to do great. And I see the potential in you and believe in you 100%. And that quote is now on a plaque at Northwest Community Credit Union. And it was just the fact that she was all about authenticity and building each other up. And she just, I only got to work with her for a short period of time, but she taught me so much about life.
She obviously left a mark, that's for sure. That kind of moves into the next question. That one of the things that I noticed in the first season of the podcast were how many people had mentors and like how much they, credit they gave their mentors. Have you had mentors in your life? Is that something that now that we're all getting a little further on in our careers that you feel is important to give back the other way as well?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I swear when it wasn't that long ago that I was starting out my career. And back then, we would have mentors, along the way, but I feel like now it's so much more formal. I'm often kind of just surprised when somebody either asks me or asks one of my colleagues if they can have this formal mentoring relationship. It feels like there should be like a match.com for mentors or something. Yeah, because it feels so much more formal now than I remembered it. So I never had a formal mentor relationship, but I think, I can think of two people who really did help me along the way. First was Kim, who I was just talking about. And the second was Ray Lancaster. He's currently the CEO of Pyramid Credit Union in Tucson. And I had lived in Arizona for a number of years. And Ray reached out to me when I was a brand new CEO, had not been in credit unions. I was this CEO of a small and struggling credit union on its path to being merged because of some just serious financial issues going into the recession. And Ray, I could go to him and ask him anything, no matter how embarrassed I was to not know it yet. I could ask him without judgment, and he would always just graciously and patiently explain whatever it was that I needed to know. And he's just a wonderful human being, and humble and kind. And I look up to him a lot, and he really did have a big influence in my early career.
I love that. Those people are so important that we can go and ask the questions to, right? So,
very much so.
As we're getting into it, actually always. If you have a free day, there's nothing on the calendar. What passions do you have outside? We're now friends on Facebook, so I see you have quite a few. But what passions outside of credit unions? What do you do to recharge? And we already talked some about work-life integration, but what are those other passions?
Definitely two things rise to the top. So it's going to be music and hiking. I'm a professional violinist, so I play in the symphony, and it's a huge, huge part of my life. And second is hiking and just the outdoors. I spend a ridiculous amount of time just laying down on my belly in the dirt to get close-up photos of mushrooms and slugs and snails, and I just love being outside and love the Pacific Northwest. And it's just 100% my passion. I would be out on a trail every day if I could.
I was going to say you're in the perfect location for that. That's for sure.
I really am. Yeah.
Beautiful part of the country.
Yes.
To move on to the rapid fire questions. The questions are rapid. Your answers do not have to be.
Okay.
So the question, what was Rachel like in high school?
Oh, man. Rachel was way too focused on getting high school over with. I don't feel like I had a high school experience. I really didn't have much of a social life. I definitely wasn't popular. It was all about achievement, and I actually graduated 2 years early. It was about getting in and out.
You were on a mission.
I was on a mission.
So you mentioned being the first time CEO earlier. One of the other things I think that we've probably all realized in credit unions is most of us just stumbled into a career in credit unions.
Yep.
So what did you want to be when you grew up?
Not a credit union risk professional at all. I fell into credit unions. I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. Sometimes I think I would have made a really great forest ranger or conservationist, and I don't know. I'm still young. Who knows?
Yeah, you can do anything you want.
Back then, I really wanted to travel the world playing violin, and I had this awesome idea in my mind that I'd make so much money doing that. And I even thought about going into medicine at one point. I had no idea what I wanted to do, really. When I first went to college, I was a violin performance major at Ohio State. And then I stumbled into credit unions like so many do back in 2009, I think it was. And it's just been a great fit for me. I love the passion in this industry and the cooperative spirit. And I found my niche, and it's given me, actually, I feel like I have a good balance between a career that's exciting and interesting to me, but also, my dad has always said, you don't live to work, you work to live. And I feel like I work at the credit union and I enjoy my job, and I feel like we're making a difference, but it also allows me to live the life that I want to live and spend time with my family and with dirt and trees.
Dirt and trees. I love it. Do you have any daily routines that if you just don't start your day off with, the whole day just feels off?
I'm so boring. I listen to NPR when I'm in the shower every morning. I actually have a shower speaker so I can hear, so I don't miss any details on the day's news developments. That's it. I'm pretty boring.
That's not a bad way to start the day, though. Informed. Is there an app or a tool that you just couldn't live without at this point?
Yes, Outlook. Basically, my whole life is on Outlook. I've never apologized to them, but I feel really sorry for my coworkers, because if they ever need to look at my calendar to plan a meeting or something, they're going to see a bunch of embarrassing personal stuff, like personal reminders, like don't forget to pick up rash cream, or I'm just kidding, not rash cream. It was for a dog.
Sure,
but
we'll go there.
It's just I write myself reminders and set myself appointments to remember to do things. And everything is on Outlook. If I lost it, I would be lost.
It's funny you say that, because my personal work calendar has everybody's birthdays on it, and any appointment I have, I'm like, I don't care if everybody knows it. So I'm with you. I don't have time for two calendars.
I know. Who does?
Who does? The random question: what's the best album of all time? That one you can listen to without skipping a song.
Okay, I'm torn here. So the classical side of me would say anything Shostakovich. I think I could listen to his symphonies basically on repeat till I die. More modern, I would say Muse, The Second Law. I love that album, and that's another one I could listen to over and over.
Perfect. I'm a reader. Jill and I have a stack of books in our house, and a lot of them have now been recommended to us on the podcast, and we're trying to make our way through. Do you have any books that either you've been gifted or that you've gifted or that you just recommend that everybody should read?
One in particular, it's Les Miserables by Victor Hugo.
Okay.
If you haven't read it, read the unabridged version. It's a little slow in places because it gets deep into some French history, but it is so powerful. I read it when I was 15, and I actually would not marry my husband until he'd read it too.
That's awesome. I can say that I haven't read it, so
it's a good one.
I will have to get it. As you've gotten older, and we touched on this earlier, what's become more important to you? And like I'd kind of like to circle back to it. Like, what, if anything, has just become less important?
I think I would probably, if I could go back and give myself advice, it would be to just slow down. It's not this race or a claw to the top. All of these petty things I've gotten myself worked up over in the past are just really meaningless. And I would tell myself to just stop trying to prove myself to myself. You're enough. It's just be content and focus on the things that bring you joy. And I think that we're all guilty of that. I think of just losing sight of living our lives by just getting wrapped up in the mundane and losing sight of what's really important.
So there's a question I don't send, but when you hear the word success, who's the first person that comes to mind?
Oh my gosh, that's a really tough question. There are so many people in my life that pop up into my mind, actually. My siblings, my parents, I admire them more than they'll ever know. And I'm fortunate enough to look back and think about the childhood that I was blessed to have and just how much my parents sacrificed for us. And today, they have the benefit of 3 adult children who love and respect and admire them. And I think that's success.
That's beautiful. It's still one of my favorite questions just because we all define success differently. So,
yeah.
And in the first season, mom was the number one answer, by the way.
Really?
So, yep. so you saying parents, that's a good one for the
I'm
dads
not very
out there.
original, but that's
I think
awesome.
It's great.
That's awesome.
I think that is the perfect way to wrap up. I thank you again, Rachel, for taking the time today and for sharing your story. Like I said, your post on LinkedIn hit me. So I did want to talk to you about it. The last question that I have for you is, do you have any final thoughts or final asks of our listeners?
I think I would just say what I would probably say to myself, which is just be kind to yourself. Stop looking in the rearview mirror. Stop agonizing over every decision you've ever made, and stop kicking yourself for not doing such and such at such and such a time. Just get out of your own way and remember that there are no guarantees in your life. So just live it fully day by day.
That is a beautiful way to end. We will link to everything we talked about today in the show notes. Is there a preferred or best way for people to reach you? I've mentioned LinkedIn. I know you're on Twitter.
Yeah, LinkedIn, Twitter, you're welcome to. You're welcome to look me up on Facebook. You can shoot me an email anytime. It's rpross@mapscu.com.
That's fantastic. We will link to all of that as well. And again, thank you so very much for being on the show, Rachel. I hope you have an amazing day.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Before we go, I would like to once again thank Rachel for taking the time out of her busy schedule and just being so willing to be open and share with us. Also, a big thank you to our sponsor, Co-op Financial Services. Make sure to click their link in the show notes, find out all the good stuff they have going on. And also, just in case you missed it, at the end of last year, you asked for it, so we put it together for you. You can now Google the CUInsight Experience podcast book list, or find it below in the show notes. And we have links to every book mentioned on the show, or every book that our guests have recommended, with links to Amazon. So happy reading and have a great day.